Imagine celebrating your honeymoon with the love of your life, surrounded by serene waters and breathtaking sunsets, only for the perfect getaway to turn into a chilling nightmare that no one saw coming. David and Sophia had arrived at the lakeside resort earlier that afternoon, eager to relax and enjoy the peace of the picturesque surroundings. The resort was everything David had dreamed of, a quiet getaway tucked in the woods, with rustic cabins lining the shore. The lake was a mirror, reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun, and the air smelled faintly of pine and fresh water. Everything about this moment screamed romance. David, a 33-year-old tall Nigerian man with an athletic build, couldn't remember when he felt this calm. His clean-shaven face was often serious, but today, there was a softness in his features as he looked at the woman beside him. His wife, Sophia, had a smile that could light up any room. Her long, wavy hair danced in the breeze, and her soft features radiated warmth. At 29, she was younger than David by a few years, but they had a timeless connection. They had rented a small boat, it bobbed gently in the water as they sipped chilled wine. The lake stretched out in every direction, its surface shimmering as the sun slowly descended into the horizon. David and Sophia, in this moment, were the epitome of happiness. "Can you believe this is ours?" Sophia asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It feels like a dream." David looked down at her, forcing a smile. "It's perfect," he said, his voice tight. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. There was an unease in David's chest, something he couldn't shake. His mind kept wandering to their conversation just before the trip. Sophia had told him something, a truth she had kept hidden until now. "I know we've only been married a few days, but," she had said, her voice nervous as they packed for the trip. "This vacation is the perfect time for us to work things out." David had only nodded, not fully understanding what she meant. What was there to work out? They were just starting their life together. But now, sitting on the boat with her, he couldn't ignore the weight of her words. Something had changed between them. As they continued to drift across the lake, David took another sip of his wine, trying to push his thoughts aside. He looked at Sophia, watching her eyes shine in the fading sunlight. The way she laughed, carefree, filled him with a bittersweet pang. The sound of birds chirping and the soft lapping of water was interrupted by a sudden, terrifying scream. Sophia's body flinched, and before David could reach out, she had already fallen into the water. He froze, his heart stopping for a moment as he watched her disappear beneath the surface, her hair trailing behind her like a dark ribbon. "Sophia," he shouted, scrambling to his feet. His mind was a blur as panic rushed through him. He grabbed the paddlers, but the boat rocked wildly, throwing him off balance. His breath quickened, chest tightening. Sophia. The lake, which moments before had been peaceful, now felt like a vast, empty chasm. The water swallowed her, and an overwhelming sense of dread consumed David's thoughts. What had just happened? She couldn't have fallen that easily, could she? He pushed the boat toward the spot where she had disappeared. His hands shook violently, his chest tight with fear. "Please, God," he whispered, his voice breaking. Seconds felt like hours. Sophia didn't resurface. By the time the local police arrived, the sunlight had faded. The serene lake that had once been so beautiful now felt oppressive, as though it was mourning what had happened. Detective Laura Martinez, an experienced investigator in her early 40s, stood at the water's edge, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. Her presence was commanding. She scanned David from the corner of her eye. He sat on a bench near the wooden hut that rented out the boats, his head in his hands, his body still trembling with shock. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered, their murmurs barely audible over the distant sounds of the lake. David looked up as Detective Martinez approached. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, and the pain in his expression seemed raw. "Sophia," he whispered. Martinez stopped in front of him. "David, I'm Detective Martinez." I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me exactly what happened. David's voice hesitated as he spoke, his hands shaking. She fell, he repeated. We were just out for a ride. She was adjusting her seat, and then she just slipped. Martinez nodded, though her gaze remained intense. His version of events seemed reasonable at first, but something felt off. It was the way he said slipped, as if he hadn't fully absorbed the tragedy. The lack of a clear emotional response was alarming. She asked him to walk her through the timeline, and David described their time on the boat. He mentioned their laughter, the drinks, the peacefulness of the lake. But when she asked him about the argument the witnesses had mentioned, David's calm posture faltered briefly. Argument, he asked, confused. What argument? Two tourists, a couple who had rented a boat earlier that afternoon, had heard raised voices not long before the boat trip. They had mentioned it to the police, noting that the couple had been arguing heatedly. Do you recall arguing with Sophia? Martinez pressed. David seemed to collect himself for a moment. He shook his head. I don't think so. We didn't argue. We were talking about the future, about how we were going to handle things after the trip. Martinez didn't push further, but she noted the slight tremor in his voice and the slight hesitation before his words. Something didn't sit right, but for now, she filed it away, waiting for more information. She turned to Officer Daniels, who had been speaking with the boat rental staff. They were eager to get the case sorted, but something about David's story still nagged at her. Check with the company about the life jackets, she said. I want to know everything. The boat rental company's staff confirmed that life jackets were provided to all customers, and that they were required to wear them while out on the water. When Sophia's body was recovered from the lake, however, it became clear that she wasn't wearing one. The discovery of the missing life jacket caused doubt in the investigation. Detective Martinez stood near the shoreline, looking out over the water, her mind buzzing with questions. Why would Sophia not wear the life jacket? Was it an oversight, or had someone removed it from her? And if so, who? Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a new story. Your support truly means the world to us. Sophia's phone, found among her belongings, offered another clue. Detective Martinez opened the text messages, searching for anything that might shed light on the situation. One message, in particular, stood out, sent only days before the trip. It was to a close friend, someone Sophia had confided in. I finally told him, the message read. I don't know how he's going to react. I think he's furious. He wants to divorce me, but we're going to try and work things out on this trip. The words hit Detective Martinez like a punch in the stomach. It was a devastating revelation. Sophia had told David that she was transgender. The weight of that secret had likely been eating at her for months, maybe even years, but now it seemed like the root of the issue. Had David known? Or was this the first time he was hearing it? Martinez quickly found a way to confront David with this new information. Hours later, David was in a cold interrogation room at the local police station. Detective Martinez sat across from him, watching him closely as Officer Daniels stood nearby. We've spoken to the boat rental staff, Martinez began, her tone firm. And we've reviewed the life jacket policy. Why wasn't Sophia wearing one? David swallowed, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I don't know. She must have taken it off. Was it an accident, David? Martinez continued. Was it an accident that she fell into the water, or something else? David's mouth went dry. His mind raced as he thought about the moment on the boat, the plan he had set in motion. How could he explain it now? Martinez placed the phone on the table, the text message from Sophia glaring up at him. You didn't know about Sophia's secret, did you? That she was transgender? David's eyes widened. I didn't mean for it to happen, he muttered. But the truth was already clear. It was too late to undo what had been done. Before the tragedy, David's life had been far different. He had spent most of his 30s alone, a man yearning for companionship but never quite finding the right fit. His relationships had been short-lived, filled with promise that ended in disappointment. The demands of his career and his struggles left him isolated. His friends had grown tired of his bitterness, and his family had long since stopped asking about his love life. He had decided to try something new, a dating app. It wasn't something he ever thought he would try, but at that point, what did he have to lose? To his surprise, he connected with someone almost immediately: Sophia. She was funny, intelligent, and beautiful. Her profile picture showed her smiling before sunset, her long, wavy hair blowing gently in the wind. Something about her smile pulled him in, and their conversations quickly became a mix of deep, meaningful exchanges and playful banter. It wasn't long before their messages turned into phone calls, and then those calls led to dates. David was mesmerized by Sophia's energy. She was full of life, eager to share her thoughts and dreams with him. They explored the city together, spent lazy Sunday afternoons in cozy cafes, and laughed endlessly over shared meals. There was an undeniable connection, and David couldn't help but fall for her. It felt like they had known each other forever. A month into their relationship, Sophia opened up about her past, how she had faced challenges that David couldn't fully understand, but she assured him she was strong and confident in who she was. David admired her strength but had no idea that there was more she had yet to reveal. 3 months in, during a romantic dinner by candlelight at a rooftop restaurant, David proposed. His heart pounded with excitement as he knelt before her, his hands trembling slightly. He asked the question that had been on his mind since the day they met: "Will you marry me?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears, her smile wide and radiant as she nodded. "Yes, of course," she whispered, and David slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling as if everything was falling into place. They celebrated their engagement with laughter and toasts, the night carrying them both on a wave of happiness. But the honeymoon period didn't last long. On their wedding night, Sophia sat David down, her expression serious, a layer of vulnerability he hadn't seen before in her eyes. "David," she began, her voice soft but steady, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you earlier." Her fingers played nervously with the edge of her sleeve, and David could see the tension in her posture. David, who had been so caught up in their love, the whirlwind of their romance, didn't sense the storm brewing. "What's wrong, Sophia? You know you can tell me anything." She took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering, and finally spoke the words David wasn't expecting. "I'm transgender." David froze, his mind struggling to process the revelation. He had no words for a moment. This wasn't what he had imagined. He felt blindsided. How could she not have told him earlier? How could she have hidden such a significant part of herself? He had trusted her, believed in their future together, and now everything felt like a lie. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to tell you earlier, but I was scared. I didn't know if you would still love me." David didn't know what to say. "Why didn't you tell me before we got this far?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I was afraid," she whispered. "I wanted to be with you. I thought if we had a chance to be happy, it wouldn't matter. But I see now that it does." David felt the anger well up inside him. "I need space," he muttered, pushing himself away from her. The room felt suffocating, as though the walls were closing in on him. Sophia's face crumpled, and she reached for him. "David, please. I love you. I thought you were the one person I could trust." But David was already standing up, pacing. "I don't know what to think anymore. I need time." The days that followed were full of emotions for both of them. Sophia pleaded with David, trying to understand his anger and confusion, but he shut himself off. He couldn't look at her without seeing everything she wasn't telling him. The dream of their perfect life together was shattered. He began to distance himself, even as she tried to make things work, pushing for the kind of reconciliation he wasn't ready for. Sophia, heartbroken but determined, didn't give up. She loved him and wanted their relationship to be real, but David recoiled further each time she reached out. He wanted to scream, to ask her how she could have hidden this from him, but instead, he kept it all inside, letting the resentment and confusion simmer. David sat alone in their living room. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and betrayal. Divorce had crossed his mind more than once, but its financial and social implications were too great to ignore. There were too many details to untangle, too many people who would ask questions, too many bridges he'd have to burn. He could already hear the murmurs of their friends, the whispers behind closed doors. The shame. The failure. Yet, as much as he tried to dismiss it, the feeling of being deceived, of not truly knowing who Sophia was, kept gnawing at him. His anger had transformed over the past few weeks from deep hurt to something darker, more dangerous. It was no longer just about her secret, it was about him. About what he deserved after everything he had given her, after everything they'd shared. The idea of revenge took root, and with it came an overwhelming, consuming need to make Sophia feel the same helplessness and betrayal that he had. He couldn't undo what had happened between them, but he could make her understand the magnitude of what she had done. He could make her pay. The plan started to form in his mind. A getaway, something that would appear to be a step toward reconciliation. A trip that would give them both space, he told her, to process everything and maybe rebuild. Sophia, still hopeful, had agreed, unaware of the storm brewing in David's heart. The trip was to be a remote vacation, far away from their city life, a secluded cabin by the river. The idea was simple, a boat ride on the river. They could reconnect, talk things through, maybe even heal. But David had another plan. His mind raced as he plotted each step. He would wait for the right moment, wait until they were on the boat, with nothing but the cold water surrounding them. He knew the river well enough, its powerful current, its isolation, and he knew that Sophia, still trusting him, would never suspect what was coming. On the boat ride, David kept up the illusion, his words soft, soothing, trying to give the impression of a man still invested in making their marriage work. Sophia, unaware, let herself relax. She smiled, leaning over the edge of the boat to take in the view. David watched her, his grip tightening on the edge of the boat, the plan unfolding in his mind. He seized the moment, the second her guard was down. Without a second thought, he pushed her into the river, the sound of her startled gasp drowned by the rushing current. He'd made sure she wasn't wearing a life jacket, the weight of his actions hung heavy in the air as he watched her struggle against the current. For a brief, twisted moment, he felt a strange sense of relief, a release of the tension that had been building up inside him. The resentment, the anger, the need for control, everything came together in that one impulsive decision. He had made her feel the helplessness he had felt, the loss of control. And now, he stood there, the boat rocking gently, the water flowing relentlessly, as Sophia fought for her life. But as the seconds passed, a cold realization started to settle in, he had gone too far. The darkness of his actions began to envelop him. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. What had he done? David sat in a small, cold prison cell, the weight of his choices crushing him from all sides. The sterile walls felt suffocating, and the only sound was the soft clink of chains as he moved. The once privileged man, who had everything, love, stability, the promise of a future, was now reduced to this, a prisoner, a murderer. His confession had come not long after, an emotional breakdown that revealed the twisted path his rage had led him down. He had never expected to be caught, but the evidence had been undeniable, and the law had done its work. Sophia's body had been found hours later, pulled from the river, lifeless, her final moments forever imprinted in David's memory. As he sat there in his cell, the truth of what he had done hit him with a force that almost knocked the breath out of him. His mind replayed the events, the push, the helpless look in her eyes as she was swept away. He thought of her trusting smile before everything shattered, of the woman he had once loved with all his heart. The pain of his betrayal surged through him, and the remorse was almost unbearable. David's heart ached, not just for Sophia, but for the man he had become. He had once believed that love could conquer all, that truth and trust were the foundations of a relationship. Now, he was faced with the irreversible consequences of his rage. There was no going back, no undoing the damage. As he stared at the cold, gray walls of his cell, he realized the greatest punishment wasn't the prison, it was the weight of his conscience, the knowledge that he had destroyed the one thing that had once mattered most.